Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Thursday, April 3rd, 2025. And after a couple of interesting technical difficulties, it is now 3:18 p.m. And we have with us from the Legislative Council, Beth St. James, to talk to us about the policy piece of H 454, which is the Education Transformation Bill. Probably shortening that, but at any rate, we're very glad you could take the time to stop by our committee. You've been busy in every other committee in the building, so we appreciate you coming to see us.
My pleasure. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Would you like me to share my screen?
Sure. And it's on our, Erin has posted the bill too. Or whichever one you sent us.
Yes, so we're going to walk through the House Education Strike-All Amendment to H 454 as introduced. The bill is currently in Ways and Means. And there will be a whole lot more language for you all to consider shortly. So this represents the policy pieces of the bill, the education policy pieces of the bill. And it starts with the findings and intent section. I do think the intent section is important for you all to look at because it lays out a timeline of future action to move towards a future state. But do you want to look at the findings?
Is that where the intent is?
Yeah, so the findings are subsection A of section 1, and then the intent is subsection B on page 3.
Okay, why don't we go to the intent piece, because I think, yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So everything above what we're about to walk through is some findings. And if you have questions about them, I'm happy to answer them at any time. So subsection B of section 1 is some intent language. And we're also putting the word plan there, and you'll see why. So to ensure each student is, I'm just going to read this. I think it's important to it kind of provides the context of the whole bill. To provide substantially equal educational opportunities that will prepare them to thrive in a 21st century world is the intent of the General Assembly to work strategically, intentionally, and thoughtfully to ensure that each incremental change made to Vermont's public education system provides strength and support to its only constitutionally required governmental service.
Well, that could answer our question if we lose all our federal funds. This is in the Constitution.
Of Vermont, not the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah. U.S. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so this is the plan part. It is further the intent of the General Assembly to, I'm on line 11 on page 3, in the 2026 session, enact new, larger school district boundaries and begin the process to create voting wards within each school district to ensure school board membership is apportioned in such a manner as to achieve substantially equal weighting of the votes of all voters in the election of school board members.
So is this kind of like what we did a couple of years ago with reapportionment?
Yes.
That took an entire legislative session to get through.
Yes. It is exactly the same thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Subdivision B. So that was in the 2026 session. And then subdivision B states that it is
just back on that point. Reapportionment we have to do. That's in the Constitution. This intent language doesn't mean the legislature has to do it.
correct. Well, correct. However, it is a policy choice on a model of representation on the school boards from the new school districts that the General Assembly is considering creating. If you want proportional representation, then you do have to do some sort of apportionment process. That's a constitutional one voice, one vote requirement. But you don't have to have proportional representation. You could have, for example, at-large representation, where all the members are elected by everyone and they are deemed to be thinking for and voting for all of the students in the district.
Just in my head, I mean, I know the intent is here,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean we'll actually do this.
No, this is all intent language.
Thank you.
Yes. So the next intent piece is that the General Assembly intends to provide or enable the provision of the necessary staffing, resources, and support to AOE, the Secretary of State's office, town clerks, and other integral parties to the election system to hold the first school board member elections within the newly created school districts in November 2028. And moving on to page 4. Provide or enable the provision of the necessary staffing, resources, and support to AOE, the State Board of Education, and other integral parties to ensure that the necessary guidance and funding is in place to allow for a smooth and successful transition between the operation of Vermont's current 119 school districts to the new larger school districts, with new school districts assuming responsibility for the education of all resident students on July 1, 2029. Okay, that's all intent. Now we move into the substantive pieces of the bill. Section 2 is an amendment to the Commission on the Future of Public Education, which was created last year in the Yield Bill. They are currently up and running, and they are doing work, and their final deliverable to you all is in December of this year. And what this section does is it does not change the makeup of the commission, the current members, they're all still there. But it adds 5 non-voting members to the commission. Those 5 non-voting members, 2 would be appointed by the speaker, 2 would be appointed by the committee on committees, 1 would be appointed by the governor. Generally speaking, they're either retired superintendents, retired school business officials, or retired school board members. And those 5 non-voting members, okay, avert your eyes, I'm going to do some scrolling. Can never remember the actual page number. Those 5, we'll go back to everything that's struck through. Those 5 non-voting members are going to make up, I'm on page 17 now, line 6, the School District Boundary Subcommittee. The School District Boundary Subcommittee is charged with determining the most efficient number, I'm on line 8, of school districts and proposed boundary lines based on educational research, Vermont's geographic and cultural landscape, historic attendance patterns, and a comprehensive analysis of school locations, conditions, and capacity.
So when they were thinking about conditions and capacity, is the building itself falling apart and full of mold, or is it fairly new? Is it a 200 student school and we need a building with 600 students? Is that the kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
And you'll see there's actually specific data points that need to be included on the maps for each school.
Okay.
So this new school district subcommittee, again, is made up of those 5 non-voting members, and their charge is to recommend not more than 3 school district boundary proposals to you all. And those proposals are required to increase equitable access to educational opportunity, maximize opportunities for modern regional, middle, and high schools with the least disruption to students, provide access to education for resident students in grades kindergarten through 12. Going on to page 18 now. Provide access to CTE for all eligible students. To the extent practical, not separate towns within school districts as those boundaries exist on July 1, 2025. To the extent practical, consider the availability of regional services for students, such as designated agencies, and how those services would integrate into the new proposed school district boundaries. To the extent practical, result in school districts with a minimum average daily membership of approximately 4,000 students. And to the extent practical, consider historic attendance patterns in geographic areas that do not operate public schools at all grade levels from kindergarten through grade 12. So not more than 3 proposals to you all. And each one of those proposals, whether it's 1 proposal or 3, has to meet all of these criteria.
So is this addressing some of the rural issues as well? It seems to me in the geography, so that you're not going over 2 mountain ranges for 2 hours because it's nearby.
Your hope
Crow flies is nearby. But
Yes.
Okay.
And their general charge was a requirement to consider Vermont's geographic and cultural landscape. So yes, those considerations should be taken.
So other than the goal of having districts with at least 4,000 students, I look at this, there's no maximum number of school districts that they could recommend. I mean, 119 probably doesn't work because they would be totally, okay. So we don't know what they'll end up with.
It said a minimum average daily.
I know.
Not maximum, and so the difference is
Yeah, I
83,000 divided by
You could
4.
still have a
20.
much bigger district in the, Chittenden County area. My other question is procedural. If these 5 subcommittee members are non-voting, how does the subcommittee actually come up with recommendations?
Great question. It's accounted for in here, and basically they own their work. So the subcommittee has sole authority over their proposals to you all. The commission does not vote on it. It is the subcommittee's work. And the commission itself can attach an addendum or send a separate report if they somehow disagree with what the subcommittee is doing, and the subcommittee is required to provide the commission with regular updates.
So if they don't reach unanimous consensus, you could have a couple different options of the 3.
I suppose so.
Right, but they have to present up to 3,
Up to 3.
but it doesn't say up to 3 that all 5 of them agree with.
No.
That's what I'm getting, and they don't vote, so I think you agree with me, but you don't.
They don't vote, but they decide.
They have to make their ultimate,
That's fine. I mean, five's a workable number, I mean, we're 11 and we all get along and think the same.
Well, if everybody thinks exactly the same, you only need one of you.
Right. that's
The
right.
whole idea is the diversity of
I'm-
thought.
I'm being facetious. on
Yes.
that.
Beth, could you just define or tell me how the committee defined the phrase cultural landscape?
that is not defined. I think the intent here, and I cannot breathe in legislative intent into your words. So I would encourage you to reach out to your colleagues on House Education. But my understanding is that geographic landscape is pretty straightforward, right? There's mountains, there's rivers, there's valleys, there's whatever. The cultural landscape, my understanding is that this language was meant to get at the fact that different geographic areas of the state may pride themselves or have different values that they want to see in their education system. And so those considerations need to be taken into consideration as well.
No, it's a tricky phrase.
It's more of a technical question here, but on page 15, there was references to 2024 work to be completed.
Yes, those have all been completed.
Okay.
Yep, and we'll go back up.
Purposeful, okay.
Yes.
I need to go backwards on you here, but I read this last night.
Yes, and I'll just say that everything that's not underlined, right, is current law. And what they've done, and I think in the interest of time, unless you tell me otherwise, I'll just summarize what they've done to the charge of the commission. And that is they've all of the deliverables of the commission and all of the different topics that the commission is required under current law to consider. They've struck almost all of them except for this one on page 10, line 13, governance. So the commission itself, their role now is to make recommendations to you all on state level governance. What's the role of AOE? What's the role of the State Board of Education? What decisions should be local or made at the state level? That is the commission's work from now on, should this language pass. The commission is no longer required to be submitting an analysis on the physical size and footprint of the education system, education funding, or the role of public schools. And we kept everything that's already been done. So those reporting dates from 2024, those have been done. We kept them in there.
Can I ask a follow-up question real quick? Would it be better just to make a reference that that's been done versus, because it's a little confusing.
It's all that's
confusing for some, but
from a drafting perspective, there's no need to strike it. And honestly, if you strike it, it may,
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting striking the whole thing.
you would like to add clarifying language that these have been
It seems
done.
like there ought to be clarified language, because people might, when I first read it, it was like, this mission shall, but it has
Mhm.
on there that's long, that's gone.
Right, because of current law.
It's sort of a matter of how you read the bill, I think.
I'm
It would have to be,
People will ask that. question.
yeah, so that should be
It ought to
explained
be
as the.
considered, it ought to be clarified.
I'm happy to,
Possible.
I'm happy to,
I'm just looking out in the.
I would just say from a drafting and a legal perspective, this is quite common. What we've done here, but I hear your confusion and I'm happy to provide any sort of amendments you'd like.
I mean, I know it's done, but I'm just thinking about others outside of here. It seems like it ought to be clarified.
So probably in a floor report or any explanations, that is a good thing to take note of to make sure it's addressed. As opposed to changing the legislation.
That was the most expedient thing
Yeah,
to do,
Yeah,
but
probably that, but we should let the, I'm making a note. Okay, that pairs.
Beth, you may not be able to answer this, but, you said it was the same mission, same appointees as last year.
Correct.
And I sort of remember that they were supposed to come up with recommendations for this session of things to do, and they couldn't reach any consensus, from what I understand, so they didn't make any recommendations. Wondering if the committee looked at what would make it different this time.
I can't answer that question.
But you.
The,
At least I got a smile on it.
I hear you.
the chair of education is
Yeah.
having office hours up in the cafeteria from 3 to 5, and if we let poor Beth go before
Okay.
5, you can go up and ask a question.
Okay, so let's go back to the subcommittee.
Just not a screen scroll.
I know,
Close your eyes. What page should we?
okay, so we are gonna go to page 18. So we've walked through what the language that the school district boundary proposals, the criteria they need to meet. We're on line 13 now. And here are some of the other things the subcommittee may consider. So the subcommittee may consider and make recommendations for the optimal location of schools, including CTE programs, to meet all of that criteria that we just walked through. The subcommittee is required to provide regular updates to the commission. And here's that language about sole authority. The committee shall have the sole authority to determine the contents of the report and maps required under subdivision 4 of this subsection. The commission may provide its own comments to the subcommittee and the relevant committees of jurisdiction, either as an addendum to the report of the subcommittee or as a separate report. The district boundary subcommittee on page 19 now is required to coordinate and engage with the commission's public engagement subcommittee and the public engagement consultant to maximize public input and feedback regarding the development of the proposed new school district boundaries. The subcommittee will have the assistance of the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, and they can also contract for a facilitator or for facilitation or mediation services. And then again, on page 19, we're on line 12, subdivision 4. Here are their deliverables to you all. On or before December 1st of this year, the district boundary subcommittee shall submit to the education committees and the money committees and the government operations committees. Two things, a report and maps. So the report needs to include what are the new district boundaries and a detailed analysis of how each of those boundaries meets all of the criteria that we walked through. So basically, what is their methodology? And then moving on to page 20, maps. The subcommittee is also required to submit detailed maps for each proposal. And those maps need to include the average daily membership for each proposed school district for the 2023-2024 school year, the member towns of each school district, the location of public schools and non-therapeutic approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition as of July 1, 2025, and the grades operated by each of those schools, the 5-year facility condition index score for each school, PCB testing score for each school, and 10-year change in enrollment between 2013 and 2023 for each school. And that is it for the subcommittee. So moving on, the way House Education organized this bill after everything we've just walked through is they have kind of 3 buckets of topics. The first topic is scale, and with each topic comes a small intent section. So it's the intent to transform education in Vermont by leveraging attainable and research-based scale to increase equity of opportunity and promote efficiency and affordability. And the first substantive section in the scale bucket of consideration is section 4, which is an amendment to the Education Quality Standards Statute in Title 16, section 165, which adds class size minimums. I'm on page 21, line 7. So education quality standards are just what they sound like, the standards that all public schools are required to meet and follow. And this is adding a standard to require public schools to comply with average class size minimums. And there's clarifying language here that says that when class size minimums apply to content areas, an individual class may be smaller than the average class. As used in the subdivision, content area means a group of courses within a specific licensing endorsement area. So overall, your English classes for high school need to meet the class size minimum for that grade range, but it's possible that you have, an advanced British Lit class that is lower than the minimum, as long as the average in all of English classes meet the minimum. So class size standards on line 13 for the average class size minimum for kindergarten shall be 12 students. The average class size minimum for grades 1 through 4 shall be 15 students. And the average class size minimum for grades 5 through 12 in all required content area classes shall be 18 students. Multi-age classrooms for grades kindergarten through 8 shall be limited to 2 grade levels per classroom. We're going to page 22. Here's some exception language. CTE, flexible pathways, terminal courses, advanced placement courses, courses that require specialized equipment, and driver's education classes shall be excluded from the class size minimum requirements. Small group services for the purpose of providing special education, supplemental or targeted academic intervention, or EL instruction shall also be excluded from class size minimums. And then class sizes shall not exceed the maximum occupancy limits set by local and state fire codes. On page 22, line 11, if a school board determines that it operates a school that is unable to comply with the class size minimum standards due to geographic isolation, or the school has developed a plan to come into compliance with those minimums, they can ask the state board for a waiver. And then the state board is required to define what geographic isolation means. And then the state board's decision on that waiver is final.
So there may be a small group that would otherwise have a 2-hour bus ride for kindergartners, and that doesn't make a lot of sense.
I think there would be a lot of,
Small
yeah.
school.
Yeah, I mean, but,
Students.
right, but there isn't ever going to be an ability to merge or combine with some other place because of distance or whatever, so they're accounting for that, okay.
So what happens if a school has not received a waiver and it does not comply with class size minimums? There is already, and did I keep it in? Yes, I did. On page 23, we'll go back up to the language, but on page 23 is current law, starting on line 5. For what happens, the process for what happens if a school is not meeting education quality standards now. This is current law, and this bill does not propose to change that in any way. What it does is says, if you fail to meet class size minimums over the course of 2 consecutive years, I'm on page 22, line 21, then the secretary follows the process that's in current law. And that process is that the secretary would notify the school in writing of what actions, I'm on line 12 on page 23, what actions the district has to take in order to come into compliance and provide technical assistance. And then if the school fails to meet standards to make sufficient progress within 2 years of that determination, the secretary makes recommendations to the state board, and then the state board takes one or more of the following actions. They could order the agency to continue to provide technical assistance for one more cycle of review. They could adjust supervisory union boundaries. I'm on page 24 now. The secretary could assume administrative control of an individual school. The state board could close an individual school and require tuition to be paid, or the state board could require 2 or more school districts to consolidate their governance structures. So if you don't meet class size minimums, this process would apply.
Tom and then Jim.
Are these actual bodies, or is this wiping out the phantom student or reducing it?
I would say actual bodies, yes.
Okay, because for years, I mean, maybe Act 46
I think we got rid of
dented it a little bit, but there was the idea that small schools were able to continue because there was a regulation that said if you had 100 students 3 or 4 years ago and you try, I mean, that we call them phantom students. I don't know if that's the statutory.
No, that term certainly does not appear in Title 16, but yes, I'm familiar with that, very familiar with that term, yes.
Okay.
So this would be the children in the seats.
The children what?
In the seats.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you say when these minimum class size take effect?
I have not. They would take effect on, let me pull up my cheat sheet here.
Before or after the maps are redrawn?
Before.
Or,
I
okay.
believe they take effect in July 1, 2026. Yes.
Okay, so even though we don't have new district maps,
Correct.
the current districts might be faced with some choices to make.
Correct.
Although
Year
they got
district.
time, so,
Right, because I was gonna say, it sounds like in the current statute,
yeah,
they've got 2 years, well, or maybe,
Right.
they've got 2 years and plus another 2 years, so even though it starts in next year, that's the clock ticking, and it would
It
be
could
4
be
more,
4
it would be
years,
at least 4 more years, possibly 5.
You are
They
exactly
could do
right.
1 more cycle of review, so they're not gonna close next year.
yeah, okay, just, thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Exactly right. Okay, so, okay, and then there's language, there is a due process requirement, there's a hearing opportunity, et cetera. So that is class size minimums. Section 4, we're gonna go to section 5 now. Page 25. Notwithstanding any, basically what we just walked through and any other provision of law to the contrary, the state board is prohibited from ordering school district consolidation or school consolidation if a school fails to comply with class size minimum education quality standards, and the resulting consolidation would result in school construction costs in excess of the applicable district's capital reserve account until the General Assembly establishes new school district boundaries and takes further action regarding the consequences for failure to meet education quality standards. So while we move to the future state, if there is a school that does not meet class size minimums, and we go through that timeline that you just walked through, you know, the cycle of review, the 2-year consecutive measurement, if you have not taken further action regarding what it means to not meet education quality standards, and if we're not in our new school districts yet, then the state board cannot order school consolidation if that would result in that community having to go out to bond and taking on more debt. But if they had the amount to do that project in their capital reserve account, that would be fair game.
So that could surely be the case with some communities already.
Which part?
Um,
The capital reserve account or the
No.
bonding?
If they don't have the money,
right. So in that case,
they wouldn't be forced to close.
They would not be, that option would be off the table for the State Board of Education.
because that's just been a constant
Mhm.
concern, with really small towns.
Mhm.
That aren't gonna want to ship their kids, whatever distance.
Mhm.
I'm not saying like 2 miles down the road, but
And so this gets at sort of a little sideways school construction that we don't have yet. So we're not forcing them to do stuff that they can't afford to do.
can't ever do.
Have it.
They just can't ever do it.
Right.
Yeah. It makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right. So that was section 5. We're moving on to section 6. Page 26. Here's, this is a piece of session law requiring the State Board of Education to update some rules and to give you all a report. So the first piece in subdivision 1 is requiring the State Board of Education to initiate rulemaking and amend the education quality standards rules. The class size minimums we just walked through are in the education quality standards statute. But the State Board of Education also has a rules series, which has a lot of the nitty-gritty details related to education quality standards. And this subdivision would ask them to update those rules to make sure that they don't conflict with class size minimum standards that we've put in statute. And then they're also required in subdivision B to adopt standards for statewide proficiency-based graduation requirements. And later on line 10 there, you'll see that those graduation requirements would be based on recommendations from the Agency of Education, and you'll see a piece of session law later on where the agency is required to make those recommendations. And then subdivision 2 is asking the State Board of Education to initiate rulemaking to update a different rule series, the 2200 rule series, which is the approved independent school rule series. And later on, you will see that this bill is asking approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition to follow class size minimum standards. And so this language is asking the state board to update the independent school rules to reflect that requirement. It's also asking them to update those rules to provide a process for what happens if a school fails to meet class size minimum requirements that would provide an approved independent school, I'm on line 20, substantially similar opportunity to come into compliance with class size standards, class size minimum standards that it would provide to a public school. That process that we walked through, that's all current law, only applies to public schools because education quality standards only apply to public schools. So there's no built-in process for what happens if an independent school does not follow minimum class size standards. So this is asking the State Board of Education update the rules to reflect the minimum class size requirements and also come up with a process for review and not what happens if they're not compliant. And then page 27, the last piece in this section is requiring the State Board of Education to submit a report to your education committees with proposed standards for schools to be deemed small by necessity. And then moving to section 7 is some intent language. I'll just summarize this in the interest of time. That again, this is intent language. There is nothing here that is requiring anything of anyone. It is saying that it is the intent of the General Assembly that for schools that operate grades 6 through 12, at some point, the minimum average daily membership for those schools will be at least 450 students. And that part of getting there will be providing a state aid to school construction program.
So, for example, in my town, we have a middle school and a high school. Is it they aren't next to each other anymore. They used to be, but would you just add those two together and say 450? Is that what the intent of how? Or is it?
No, it would be different each school.
Each school. Okay.
So minimum class size standards was class size. We've gone up a level to school size now.
Okay.
Okay.
Just to be clear, that they're not required to operate at this level?
No, this is all intent language.
So there's no consequences if they don't?
Correct, not in this bill.
So there isn't the class size, but not
Yes.
the school size.
Correct.
Yeah, somewhere in that, I read in, one of the summaries that, excuse me, with independent schools, there was a new requirement on 50% had to be public. Where's that?
We'll get there. TBD.
Didn't go
This
time.
You know, these things come in and out, so.
It's the same section.
We're almost there.
It's the same section that we'll walk through that requires them to follow class size minimums. It's all in one section.
We're still in the scale
We're
section.
still in the scale section, correct? Okay, are we good to move on to section 8? Okay,
Yes.
page 27, line 18, section 8. Prohibition on school closure and transition to paying tuition, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary. A school district shall be prohibited from closing an existing public school. And then moving on to page 28, and then providing education, providing for the education of its resident students by paying tuition to a school of the parent's choice, which is what happens now. Under current law, if a school district closed a school, it could make the choice to provide the education for those students that are affected, if they are, if there would be no other schools in the district, to tuition those students out. And the way our tuitioning system works is it's individual choice. As long as it's an approved independent school, you can go to any approved independent school or any public school, either in the state of Vermont or in any other state or in any other country.
Right. This is where we get, yes,
Yes.
Switzerland and Sweden and whatever.
Can you just say that again?
Yes. So current law, our tuition system, first of all, under current law, it's all or nothing. You either operate your schools or you tuition. You can't operate schools for some grade. You can operate schools for some grades and tuition for some grades. But if you operate K through 12 and you close, let's say you operate 3 K through 12 schools or K through 6 schools, and you close 1 K through 6 school, you still have 2 K through 6 schools there. So you can't pay tuition for those affected students.
Go somewhere
You
else.
go somewhere else,
outside the
right,
district.
right. But if you only operated 1 K through 12 school and you closed that school, you could theoretically pay tuition for those students under current
Anywhere they
law,
want to go.
anywhere they want to go.
That's right now.
That's right now.
That's correct.
Yes. And has been for many years. And so what this section does is it says, if you close a school, if you can't find a place for those students in another school that you're operating in your district, then you cannot pay tuition to a school of a parent's choice. You would have to, the school district itself would have to designate a school in another school district. And it would have to be a public school for those students to go to. Yes.
What's the logic? Just because they want it that way.
Who's they?
Is there a move by some to try to force an agenda?
I think that's a political question that you should ask your colleagues.
I think there's been concern that we're sending public school dollars to private schools out of state and out of country. Because we do that right now. So I think this is what it's saying, is if I'm reading this correctly, that they can designate up to 3 public schools that their students could go to with public dollars.
Only if a school has,
If there isn't a,
they're closing a school and they can't otherwise provide education in their
in
district.
their district, right, okay, so John?
So in my district, I have several small, so one, you know, from Guildhall all the way up to Bloomfield here, and they have students that the list of schools students are currently going to is about this long. You know, 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, 12 here.
Mhm.
And some of the people on that list, they go across the border into New Hampshire. And there's New Hampshire students that come across the border into Vermont.
Mhm.
So with what you know so far, with the language end of things here, is there any impact there?
Yes, but not in this section. So pause.
Only.
Yes.
Thank you.
This section is only if if a school district closes a school they're currently operating. If your school district is already operating on a tuition model, this language does not change that at all. There is language further on that changes that, but this section doesn't.
May I just clarify?
Yes, go ahead, Dave.
I'm still stuck at this, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, the school district shall be prohibited from closing an existing public school. And the "and" is key here, right? Because I read that and I said, oh, all the little schools are protected.
No.
They can't be closed.
That's not
what this is
no,
saying.
it's closing a public school and then providing for
Gotcha.
tuition. Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, let's continue.
Okay.
Just one question.
Okay, but
So related to this, and maybe it's in the kingdom, I don't know, but what if you don't have any public schools within a reasonable distance? And you need to close your school because it's dilapidated or, too small or what have you. But you do have a independent school that's within a reasonable distance. Is there any exception for that?
Not in this law, no. Not in the section. Mhm.
Yeah, I don't.
Yep.
In my area, I don't think that would apply, but it might in some other area.
Okay, now starting on page 28, line 9, we're going to go through about 20 pages of brand new law that is updating and creating a new state aid to school construction program. How detailed do you want to get here? There's no money attached to it.
yeah, so high level, just the sort of the cliff notes.
Okay, so the cliff notes are that you all are familiar with the fact that our state aid for school construction program still exists on the books. It just hasn't been funded since 2007. So all of the laws are still there. What these sections do is repeal the big programmatic laws. The repeals come at the very end. And replace it with a new program, which is very similar to what is currently operating. It creates, so section 9 is a statement of policy. Section 10 on page 29 creates the state aid for school construction program, which just creates the program within the agency. So it designates the agency of education for running the program. And then it gives them a whole host of, this section gives them a whole host of responsibilities. That includes adopting rules, what's the pre-qualification process for consultants and architects and engineering firms, providing technical assistance to school districts, maintaining a list of current school construction projects and where they are. Let's see, policies, making policies designed to reduce borrowing, conducting a needs survey, developing a formal enrollment projection model, encouraging districts to investigate opportunities for the maximum utilization of space. On page 31, maintaining a clearinghouse of prototypical school plans, et cetera. So all of the administrative duties would fall under the Agency of Education in this new program.
And the old program, it did also, I mean, a lot of that sounds familiar. I was on my school board when we did one of the last construction projects. Oh, well, they don't have any staff anymore to do this. So that's going to be addressed at some point.
There are no positions in this.
Okay.
The Secretary of Education did testify in House Education. I believe it was House Education. And I'd be happy to find the testimony and send it to you all. There were 5 positions that the agency was advocating for, and one of them was dedicated to school construction on kind of like a high level. So there has been discussion of that, but this bill does not provide any positions.
Okay. But yeah, somebody has to do the work. Okay, thank you.
Yes, so as you said, very similar to how it was currently running. Currently, the State Board of Education owns all the rules, and this would have the agency owning the rules.
Around construction.
Correct. Section 11 is new. So this, a new concept, it creates the State Aid for School Construction Advisory Board, made up of 4 ex officio members. I'm on page 32 now, which are the state treasurer, commissioner of BGS, the executive director of the bond bank, chair of the State Board of Education, and then 4 members, none of whom shall be current members of the General Assembly, but 2 members appointed by the speaker who have to have experience in education or construction, real estate or finance. And then 1 of them has to represent a supervisory union, and 2 members, appointed by the Committee on Committees, each of whom shall have experience in education or construction, real estate or finance, and 1 of whom shall be an educator. This advisory board is just that. All it does is provide advice to the Agency of Education and the General Assembly on school construction. So the bulk of this section is the duties of the board. And if you don't read carefully, it looks like this is what they are doing, but they are advising the agency on all of these things.
They're not doing all.
Exactly, exactly.
Great, so we won't need to go through
Yep.
all of that, yeah.
I will just point out that the effective date for the school construction program is July 1, 2026. This bill stands up the advisory board, and makes it effective July 1, 2025, with the thought being that there could be appointments and some work done to advise the agency ahead of the school construction program laws taking effect. Yep. And then here you'll see just a sunset for the school construction advisory board, which is pretty standard. It creates section 13, line 16 on page 35, creates the school construction aid special fund, which at this stage is pretty skeletal. It's for awarding school construction aid for funding facilities master plan grants and administrative costs of the program, and then emergency aid. And it's just made up of the funds you all appropriate to it and any interest.
So it's starting off with just sort of a balance.
Correct.
Yes, skeletal.
Yes. And if you don't already know, I'm the education policy attorney, and my colleague John Gray has the education finance piece of things. And it's possible that the finance side of things will bring some more clarity to the special fund, I believe. Okay, so section 14 on line 12 on page 36 is the approval for school construction projects. We had the language that created the duties for AOE, and now we have all of the considerations that AOE would be making when looking at whether or not to make an award. So the language in here is very similar to current law. It's not the same, but it's very similar. There needs to be a preliminary application. There's a whole host of things that the agency needs to be looking at in order to approve the preliminary application, including economic efficiencies, regional opportunities, sustainability, statewide education initiatives. And then on line 13, page 37, the secretary may approve a preliminary application if it meets certain criteria. Moving to, let's see, page 39, line 1, the preliminary, following approval of preliminary application. So as is, I believe, the same in current law, the school district needs to have voted funds or authorized the use of funds prior to approval for state aid to be issued. So following the approval of the preliminary application and assuming that the funds have been authorized by the school district, then the Agency of Education is going to assign points to priority points to projects to place them on a priority list, because there's an assumption that there's going to be more need than money. And those priority criteria would be developed in rule.
So a quick question. And when we did it, the state paid for 30%.
It's 20% now.
It's 20%.
Yes, we haven't gotten there,
Yes,
but
we just haven't got it. Okay.
The agency is required, I'm on my, page 39, line 7, the agency is required to submit an annual school construction funding request to the governor as part of its budget. And then, following submission of the governor's recommended budget, to the General Assembly, the House Committee on Education, the Senate Committee on Education shall recommend a total school construction appropriation for the next fiscal year.
Maybe this is premature, but right now, if a school district builds a new school and bonds for it, I think it goes into their per pupil spending.
Correct.
And, you know, a portion of that obviously is reimbursed to the state. Is this envision the same thing? If we go to a foundation formula, or is it all raised locally?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. That would be a question for John, when he's in here with the rest of the bill. I don't believe, and John will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that that debt service would be a part of a foundation formula. So I don't know how that's accounted for. Like, I don't believe that would be baked into the base payment.
So we hear about the foundation formula, that would be a question for
Right.
what's included and how
Right.
they do that.
How do you pay for the bonding of the
Mhm.
school? I mean, if it's 80% locally, I mean, what, how do they pay for that? They just.
I think
like
that's,
they do for a town sewer project. I don't know.
hold that for when we have ed finance come in.
Very good.
Yeah, do you want to just? I keep offering you a piece of paper to write these
I know.
things down. Go ahead.
So we had a preliminary application, which means we need to have a final application or a final approval. The secretary would then issue a final approval. And then again, there's criteria in order for the final approval. And then the final approval gets you, I'm on page 41, line 5, 20% of the eligible debt service of a project. So it's not the total debt service, it's the eligible debt service. And what is eligible, I believe, will be fleshed out in rule. Oh, well, there's a definition here. It means the product of the lifetime cost of the bond authorized for the project and the ratio of the approved cost of the project to the total cost of the project. So that would all be fleshed out in rule. And then the secretary is allowed to grant emergency aid if the secretary deems it to be an emergency, and the amount of 30% of eligible project costs up to a maximum eligible total project cost of $300,000. So that would be a maximum award of $90,000.
So the roof caves in January, the boiler dies, that kind of thing.
Well, it's still not, still won't solve those problems.
Section
Okay,
Section 15, I believe, is taken from current law. I'm on page 41, line 17, which is the appeal process. If a school district is aggrieved by the award or allocation of school construction aid, which is you can appeal to the Superior Court in the county in which the project is located. And then section 16 on page 42 is language to transfer rulemaking authority and the rules themselves from the State Board of Education to the Agency of Education.
related to construction.
Correct.
Okay.
And then here are the repeals I mentioned, repealing the current chapter 123 in Title 16 is the state aid for school construction chapter, and there are several sections that have not been touched by this bill. But the appeals here are, or I'm sorry, the repeals here are the current language for the school construction projects funding, which is basically what we just walked through in this bill. And then the appeal language that appears in current statute is replaced with the language that we just walked through on page 41. And now we get to tuition.
So the first was scale and the second's tuition.
Well, we're still in the scale bucket, but we've had a lot of
The other ones
questions.
are shorter.
Yes, so we've had a lot of questions that will be answered in this section.
Okay,
Section 18, page 40, starts on page 42 as an amendment to section 828 in Title 16. Section 828 lives in chapter 21 in Title 16, which is the town tuition program chapter. That's not what it's called maintenance of public schools. But that is where the town tuition statutes live. And when you hear mention of the fact that only approved independent schools can get public funds, not recognized independent schools, this is the piece of law that says that. And it says that by saying a school district shall not pay the tuition to a student except to, and then if you go to page 43, and then it lists all of the eligible educational programs that school districts are allowed to pay tuition to. So these amendments, which would take effect July 1, 2025, would say a school district is only allowed to pay tuition to a public school located in Vermont, an approved independent school that is located in Vermont, is already an approved independent school on July 1, 2025, and has at least 51% of its student enrollment composed of students attending on a district-funded tuition basis as of July 1, 2025, and complies with class size minimums. And then there's also language in here that allows independent schools to also seek a waiver for geographic isolation or a plan to come into compliance.
And when you added the words in Vermont, don't we have some school districts along the border that, and I don't know, maybe go to Hanover or something, so that suggests to me that's no longer allowed.
Let's keep reading.
Okay.
So for independent schools, yes. For public schools,
So you said public schools in Vermont.
yes, and we're listing them out separately. So public schools in Vermont. And then an independent school meeting education quality standards, we're keeping that. A tutorial program, we're keeping that. An approved education program, we're keeping that. 6 is a public school located in another state. And then the last category of eligible schools would be therapeutic schools that are located in Vermont or any other state or country. And then there's a definition of approved, therapeutic approved independent schools, which means an approved independent school that limits enrollment for publicly funded students residing in Vermont to students who are on an IEP or Section 504 plan, or who are enrolled pursuant to a written agreement between a local LEA or pursuant to a court order. And that those qualifications would only apply to publicly funded students residing in Vermont. So it's possible for a school that is a therapeutic approved independent school to have kiddos that are not publicly funded students residing in Vermont going there that don't meet one of these criteria. Does that make sense?
I'm just giving you an idea, so I don't know. Yeah, is everybody good? What page are we on now? Are we
We're on page 44.
44, okay.
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 Section 19 is some tuition transition language. So if you are, so a school district that pays tuition under the laws that are effect on June 30th, 2025, is required to continue to pay tuition on behalf of a student that's enrolled for the 2024-2025 school year, or who has been accepted for enrollment next year to an approved independent school under the provisions of Section 828 that are in effect on June 30th until the student graduates from high school. So if a student is, getting ready for their freshman year next year at an approved independent school, and they've already been enrolled for next year, and that independent school does not comply with class size minimums, does not have 51% of its students, or is not located in Vermont, that student could continue to have tuition paid until they graduate.
So this would in effect be just for the next 4 years.
Correct.
Right,
So
provides
that
protection.
so that the kids don't get hurt by this, which is what we have to kind of remember. This whole thing has got to be about the kids. So, great, thank you.
All right, now we are into our next bucket, statewide cohesion.
I don't think I've ever seen that in a bill before.
It is the intent of the General Assembly to consolidate structures and systems that are foundational to the administration of education. Section 21 on page 45 is a whole host of deliverables from the Agency of Education. The first, on line 7, is a requirement that on or before January 1, 2026, AOE makes recommendations to the state board for statewide graduation requirements.
Which we don't have right now.
Correct.
Yeah.
On line 11, on or before January 15th, 2027, the secretary is required to develop and publish a statewide calendar for public schools that would go into effect in the 2028-2029 academic year. And then they would report back to us on whether we needed to make any amendments throughout Title 16 to take that calendar into account.
Go ahead.
If it's January of 2027, why do we have to wait a year and a half for 28, 29?
Well, depends on who you ask. I think that would be a good question for your colleagues. Practically, one of the major, my understanding is one of the major challenges to a statewide calendar and implementation of a statewide calendar is collective bargaining agreements.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We'll have to get
Used to this concept.
Yeah, no,
Everyone has different in-service dates. Exactly.
Numbers are dramatically different now.
They're enough that we haven't been able to do a statewide calendar since I was on the school board in 1994. So that was 30 years ago, and they're still working on it.
Oh,
Have you been on the school board? I'm sorry.
Okay, subsection C on page 45, line 19. Everything in this is a report back to you all. So report back to the education committees by December of this year with recommended legislative language with the following. On page 46, in consultation with educators and administrators, a proposed implementation plan for statewide financial data and student information systems.
We had that
Correct?
crazy, chart of accounts that went down in flames after many years, right? We're trying to, this is like the statewide calendar. We're gonna do this.
I know.
That would be great. Okay.
Number 2 is recommendations for a school construction division within AOE, including position descriptions and job duties for each position, and a detailed description of the assistance the agency would provide to the field. A progress report, number 3, regarding the development of clear, unambiguous guidance that would be provided to school officials and school board members regarding the business processes and transactions that would need to occur to facilitate school district mergers, including the merger of data systems, asset and liability transfers, and how to address collective bargaining agreements. And then the report to you all should include a detailed description of how the agency will provide support and consolidation to the field, support for consolidation to the field, and an estimate of the costs associated with such work.
A lot of work to consolidate a school district.
Yes. All of the assets and the debt and the liabilities need to change hands. Systems need to change hands.
Like the
Bargaining agreements need to change hands. All those policies, right? Every school district has its own, every supervisory union has its own curriculum. Every school district has its own policy. So if you're putting 15 school districts together, you're going to have one unifying curriculum, one unifying policies, et cetera.
It's a lot of coming to agreement.
And I know that's a policy question, but it is coming to agreement. And even within, speaking of our school districts, at least when my kids were going, so could be different, but it's the idea of there was a math program in our elementary school and another in the other valley schools. And when they got to middle school, a bunch of kids were learning how to count on nickels, dimes, quarters, pennies. And then the other kids weren't. Yeah, it just was. Yeah. So the idea of
place. Yeah.
I don't want to call it Hatfields and McCoys, but the idea of having different ideas of what's good and what's better.
Right.
That's.
There can be lots of education stirs up a lot of conversation all the time, doesn't it? Yeah, pick a topic. Okay, let's continue that. Thank you.
4, line 18, page 46, in consultation with superintendents, directors of therapeutic independent schools, special education directors, and in the opinion of the agency, other experts, recommendations for the need of cooperative education services and the oversight of therapeutic schools within the school governance framework, both at a state and a local level. So how do therapeutic schools fit into our public education system? And on page 47, we're moving to our third bucket, state level governance. It is the intent of the General Assembly to ensure that the State Board of Education is the independent, transparent, and public-facing body for public education, and to ensure the board maintains its ability to provide an important outlet for the public to engage in the rulemaking process and regularly provide public comment regarding the state of Vermont's education system. Section 23 on page 47, line 10, changes who appoints 2 board members to the State Board of Education. Currently, the governor appoints all 10 members. There are 2 student members and 8 non-student members. The governor appoints all 10. This section would keep the governor appointing 8, so the 2 student members and then 6 non-student members. And then 1 member would be appointed by the speaker and 1 member would be appointed by the Senate Committee on Committees. None of the duties of the state board change.
And it's the same size.
Same size. Yep.
And
Tom.
if I maybe jump, well, I guess we're near the end, so I don't know how far I would be jumping ahead. This does not contemplate returning the choice of the secretary or the commissioner of education back to the State Board of Education to create to appoint.
Yep.
Separate issue.
It's not in
It's
this
not
bill.
here. This is Ledge Council. That's like I said. Peter will be up till 5. Okay.
The other changes you'll see in the statute are just anywhere where there's a vacant seat and there was language that the governor would fill that seat. We're just saying that the original appointing authority would fill that seat. There's transition language here, section 24, page 49. So all current members continue to serve, and then once those terms start to expire, then the new appointment process kicks in. So beginning on July 1, 2025, the first appointment after July 1, 2025 would be made by the speaker, the second by the Committee on Committees, and the third, the governor, and then the governor would do all the rest. And then it would cycle back. Every time that the seat that the speaker appointed someone to was vacant, whether it was the expiration of a term or someone stepping off the board, or even removal by the governor, the speaker would still continue to appoint to that seat.
That's it. So I think when I read through the existing language, the student are non-voting members.
There's 2 students. The junior member is a non-voting member, and the senior member is a voting member. And I believe the way it works is that the junior member becomes a senior member.
Oh, there's no age requirement then of the student.
Oh, that's a good question. Let's look. It just says
Secondary students.
secondary students.
Secondary, but they could be a 14-year-old.
I guess technically, yes. Yep.
Interesting. Okay, so there's 9 voting members on the board.
Yes, and then the secretary serves an non-voting ex officio role, so there's technically 11 seats at the table. 10 currently, 10 members are appointed by the governor.
9 voted.
9 voting.
Because the student doesn't vote. The younger student doesn't vote.
Right, but you said 11.
Because the secretary also doesn't
He
vote.
doesn't vote, and the younger student doesn't vote. So 9 are voting.
Okay.
I can draw you a chart.
Yeah, thank you. Spreadsheet. Still waiting for that email. Join this.
Okay, so we've also made an update here to the removal section. So the governor still retains removal power of any board member, no matter who appointed them. But the original appointing authority would fill that seat. So the governor could remove someone appointed by the speaker, but then the speaker would get to fill that vacancy. And then section 26 is our last substantive section. It requires the State Board of Education to essentially do a sunset review of their rules, look at all their rules and report back to you all on or before December 1st, 2026, with recommendations for rules that are no longer needed and a plan to update those rules that are still necessary, and then an order that they're going to tackle those rules in. And then any associated costs or staffing needs. And then page 51, line 1. The sole appropriation so far, had to get to the last page for it. Sum of $200,000 is appropriated from the general fund to AOE in fiscal year 2026 to provide the State Board of Education with the staffing and resources necessary to do that sunset review.
And I think if we had put this in the budget, it wouldn't be in here.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I think so. And it was one of those that I think we had, and somehow it dropped off the list. I think it just dropped off one of our 5,000 spreadsheets. And then after we passed it, somebody said, hey, what about the?
And that has nothing to do with the $4 million.
No, it's unrelated to the $4 million because that goes to the Agency of Education. This is to the State Board of Ed. You remember when Jenny Samuelson, the other Jenny Samuelson, who's the chair of the State Board of Ed, and Jamie Colby came in on Zoom and talked to us about that. Our many meetings, and somebody had a hand raised.
I did.
You did.
Are we done?
It's just effective dates, and I think I've hit the big effective dates. So, yeah.
I just wanted to quickly ask, if someone wanted to set policy guardrails for the to be determined districts, would it be appropriate here in this bill to suggest an amendment that says no school shall be closed unless without approval of said town?
I can't tell you that, I can't tell you if it would be appropriate or not, but that would, that makes sense to me, yes.
Germane, maybe.
Yeah, well, that's not my purview either.
But it made
Yes,
sense.
yes, yes,
Germane or appropriate is the wrong word, but
yes.
this is kind of where the policy.
And the House Education contemplated language related to school closures. So that was a robust discussion that continues to happen around this bill, even though there's no language in it.
Thank you.
And you know who to talk to.
I have.
Yeah. Okay, Tom.
So David, were you just, I'm sorry, I might have misheard what the question was. Were you just asking that if the towns would have the opportunity to
To vote on it.
vote on it?
Tom, we want to close your little school in East Burke, Haven Hill, and gee, the people in that town should make that decision.
Okay, I mean, just.
Gives them the control
Because
over
they're,
an asset
at
in their
some point,
town.
they're no longer, the schools are, I guess I'm not gonna make a statement. The question is, at which point would the schools really not be the purview of the town, but they would be purview of the district?
They already are.
They already are.
They
Yeah,
are.
so what, I'm just, I don't need any more answers if there isn't any.
I can explain it. Well,
Yeah.
Which means concern myself.
Yeah, go ahead.
The governing documents, the articles of agreement for all of the school districts have all different specifications for what it takes to close a school. And some of them include a vote by the town in which the school is located. So that would be, I think, where the town, some, not all.
Okay,
That would be, I think, where the town comes in.
all right, no, thanks.
Yeah, depends on the charter
Yeah.
that they did, the articles of incorporation at that point in time. My
Which would all go away.
supervisory district just voted on Monday to close its smallest school at the end of the school year. And it was a process,
Is that Ripton?
but, and I actually think the superintendent did a really nice job of handling it, but it became evident, again, based on school size and the number of kids that were ever gonna come, and there were certainly, it could go, anyway, that's a whole other conversation, and I'm not an expert in it, I'm just involved because I just know about it because it's my school district, but the other part of that, I would just say, and again, I'm not the expert on this, but if the school chooses to maintain its being open, it costs everybody else in the district, so I don't know if there's gonna be something in there that says, sure, you can keep your small school open, but you have to pay for the whole thing. And if everybody's willing, if they're willing to pay for it, it doesn't affect the other schools, that might be a different conversation. I'm making this up, but it just seems to me
No,
that
I
that would be
understand.
a thing
For
to
sure.
consider. So have we hit all the points, Beth?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah,
You may,
It's been very helpful.
oh, my pleasure.
it has been. We appreciate it. And we're hoping to get Julia Richter in. So we're closing all the Bennington schools, right?
Except
That was
except one.
line, section
Oh,
19.
I have
And you're the animal.
It was 10-0.
And you're not the House representative.
It was a 10-0-1.
Yes.
We're live people.
So now you've heard the education policy piece of it. And we will, I'm still working with Ways and Means. They have first dibs on everybody that needs to talk about ed funding, but we may be able to get them in at some point tomorrow. Worst case scenario is we all have to Zoom in Monday afternoon at some point, or we come in early on Tuesday morning and here. I just don't know yet, so we're gonna have to be flexible about that, but we're getting it in our committee on Tuesday after the floor, and we have to turn it around Tuesday, which is why I want you all to hear about it before it lands for real in our committee.
Well, depending on how much time it takes, I mean, we could certainly come in at 9 on Tuesday. if we
It might
can't
be
finish.
earlier than, yeah.
We'll know tomorrow.
Well, I'll have a much better idea tomorrow. I might have a better idea tonight. I'll be talking to Charlie.
I know this, I don't know who did it, but the summary that the speaker sent out on this bill so far was, yesterday was very helpful when I read through
Good.
it, this morning.
Did you put that together?
No, I'd love to see it.
Well, we can get you a copy. You can tell us if it's right.
No, I'm not, no.
Familiar, Jim.
No, a lot of it did. That's why I asked some of the questions. I didn't know where it was, but.
Oh, great.
I just found that personally very helpful.
Yeah.
If they do something similar for the finance piece, that would be helpful.
And that will probably
I
come
mean,
later
the-
because they haven't figured it all out yet. But they'll be the foundation. I mean, you're getting a sense of it from Tammy's presentation, I guess.
So between this bill and what we heard of from the Ways and Means
Yeah.
recording, I didn't hear, you mentioned, Beth, about a timeline due to school contracts, the 2-year contracts or 3-year contracts or whatever, but nothing, I didn't hear anything addressed in this yet about statewide contracts or
Correct.
equity of, I mean, because, specifically with teachers, but also the other employees. We have healthcare that's statewide, but not the contracts, because of course the difference between teaching in Burlington or living in Burlington and someplace, there's just different levels. So.
There's nothing in
Touching that
here,
yet.
nothing in here about that.
Okay. And I just asked because that's been a part of the larger conversation coming from the administration, starting with, not to say specifically that there would be a statewide contract, but that teachers would be paid better,
Right,
whatever that
right.
meant.
And so we may hear something about that from the ed finance, what it means. I don't know if they're.
Yeah, that was about students. and-
Well, what you're listening to now is the foundation formula.
Yeah.
We didn't get to the end, so I don't know if they're also somehow addressing anything to do with teacher. That'll be a question to ask when we,
There was one question about compensation differences across the state.
yeah,
In terms of determining what that foundation amount might be.
right,
They kind of tried to explain that there really wouldn't be that much
yeah.
difference across the state
Well, there's a-
compensation wise to determine the foundation formula that would play into that.
And understanding as much as we're supposed to or able to, the foundation formula plus, because I saw figures up to $30,000 a year, which may not be off of what we do pay for some special.
Right, when you add
some
Rural
students with
English
needs.
language learners who are in poverty or something. You could add, there's all those different weightings and.
But plus, if your school is under 55, I mean, all the then the
Right.
population down, and all those things are just like, still, I'm not sure how much I'm ever gonna be able to.
You may
align.
not, but that's why we have House Ways and Means. That's what they're working on.
Yeah.
Well,
Day and night.
I'd like to ask some serious questions about that model, how that, what goes into that, better understanding.
Well,
I didn't.
again, I think Ways and Means says this is, Professor Colby, BBM, this is what she does. She's done modeling for lots of, I mean, at some point, you could talk to her and get all the details on how she models it.
That's a good idea.
That's who you should talk to.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, all right, go ahead. Do we have any more questions for Beth? Beth, thank you very much. We need to
Pleasure.
give you a break,
Thank you.
such as you've got, and we appreciate your time. Thank you. Yes.
I will definitely be back.
Could you describe what tomorrow looks like for us? I'm just working on transportation.
We have the floor at 9:30, and that's all I know for sure at this point. I'm trying to get ed funding piece to come. I'm trying to get, who am I trying to get in? Julia Richter.
Yeah, it's true.
Do you think our afternoon will be quiet?
If it comes down to meeting on Friday afternoon or meeting on Monday afternoon, do you have a preference?
I just have one commitment I told you about tomorrow.
Yeah.
Friday, 1:30.
Yeah, I don't want to meet at 4 o'clock on Friday.
Do I?
No, I would do it from Zoom.
Yeah, well, and if we have to meet, we're not voting, so if we had to do it on a Monday or something, we could do it on Zoom. I'm trying to keep our normal sort of hours that we have now, but I also need to respect the work that Ways and Means has to do. It doesn't make sense for us to hear until they're pretty close to what they need to do. So TBD, if I hear something tonight, I'll let you know, but it may be tomorrow morning before you know. So we're on the floor at 9:30. Why don't we just check in here at 9? Unless you've heard from me to come earlier because we're going to hear from somebody. So check your texts and let's be here at 9 tomorrow morning. And we may just be for 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.